members will have an opportunity to ask any questions and then to provide any comments. Third, attending members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions, which the board will answer as necessary and appropriate. Fourth, attending members of the public will have an opportunity to provide comments. We will do this for each of the 2 articles. After the public hearing is closed, the board will discuss the input received and then take a roll call vote on whether they endorse each article as required by state law to make a recommendation on town meeting floor on Monday, November 18th. The chair or the designee will recognize speakers and may set time limits if necessary. The open meeting law requires that you provide your name and address when recognized to speak. Although we may disagree on the issues raised, everyone present at this meeting is expected to be civil to all others present. Those who do not act in a civil manner or who engage in rude or disruptive behavior will be asked to leave. Please confine questions and comments to the articles under consideration and to matters that are under the jurisdiction of the planning board. In addition, we ask that citizens inform themselves of the provisions of the laws under which this board operates, particularly the Essex zoning bylaw. Copies of the zoning bylaw can be obtained through Town Hall, and the full town bylaw is available on the town website. Copies of the applicable Mass General laws can be found online at www.mass.gov and by searching for relevant sections. The Planning Board has 2 articles on the warrant, Articles 2 and 3. We will do Article 2 first, which is additional definitions. So the article reads, to see if the town will vote to amend 6-2.2 of the town zoning bylaws definitions to delete the definition of non-conforming use pre-existing, which currently reads, I'm not going to go through all that, it's in the handout, and replace it with a new definition for pre-existing, and that's written in there simply because that's the only one that's changing. All of the other definitions that are listed in this article are new, so they're additions, they're not deletions or changes to existing definitions. Accessory use is being defined to separate it from an accessory structure. Accessory dwelling unit is being added because come February of 2025, accessory dwelling units or ADUs will be permitted in Massachusetts by right under new state law. So we wanted to put a definition in to get out ahead of that. Adult entertainment uses and adult bookstore, adult entertainment, adult dance club, adult motion picture theater, adult paraphernalia store, adult video store are all definitions added because at last town meeting we added adult entertainment uses as a special permit category. Agricultural use is referencing Mass General laws. Bed and breakfast is a definition for a new use. Commercial use defines that. Composting facility is another use that was added as a special permit category at last town meeting. Family daycare, in the interest of completeness. Drive-through establishment was added at last town meeting as a special permit category, as was event venue. Farm is included to define agricultural rights, which are now included in the use table, even though they are actually a state right, but we've included them in the use table, which we'll get to later, so we're adding that here. Function facility is also the same as event venue. And then there's the change in the definition for non-conforming pre-existing use. Taking out use and just defining the non-conforming pre-existing because it applies to both structures and to uses. Public utilities, as these are listed in uses in the use table. Recreational facility, again added, well, recreational facility and retreat center both added as special permit categories at last town meeting. Scientific and research and development has always been a special permit category and now is being defined. Shooting ranges were added as a special permit category in the spring, as were solar arrays, freestanding, and sporting venues and recreational facilities. So those were new ones. And then village business, the last definition on page 5, is a new definition that we will talk more about when we talk about Article 3. So that's just an overview of the new definitions that are being introduced in Article 2. And I don't have much more to add to that. If planning board members have any comments or questions, now is your opportunity. No. Okay. Members of the general public, if you have any questions on this, please come to the microphone and give your name and address, and we'll try to answer your questions.
Madam Chair, I just want to call the Board of Selectmen to order before we start having any dialogue.
We don't have a definition of Board of Selectmen, sorry.
There is no way to define them. So call to order for November 6, 2024. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Any comment on the definitions? As a public hearing, this is your opportunity to provide comment.
Just a quick question as far as, so you were saying the page 4 of 5, those are all special permits?
Retreat center, scientific development, shooting range, solar arrays, sport, yes, those are all special permits. but-
Okay, I just didn't see under solar arrays special permits, so I didn't know if there was a heading and I'm missing it.
It's in the bylaw now. We voted it last May.
Name and address for future.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Name and address, Alva, Martin Street. Seeing as there is no other discussion around Article 2, we'll move on to Article 3. A little background to Article 3, which is to see if the town will vote to amend the town zoning map by adding the village residential zoning district and the rural residential zoning district to said zoning map, and to amend the town zoning bylaws, Section 6-3, Establishment of Districts, by adding a new Section 6-3.3.5, Village Residential Zoning District, VRD, Section 6-3.3.6, Rural Residential Zoning District, RRD, and to amend Section 6-4, Use Regulations, by adding Section 6-4.1.4, Land Use Description and Requirements, as shown below, or to take any other action there too, which is the language for the town meeting. So as background for this article, and you can see on the map that's projected behind me and is also available on the town website, we're proposing, this is the overall map of Essex, how it would look with the residential districts that are being proposed. The background is in May of 2021, town meeting approved a temporary moratorium on change of use from residential or open property to business or industrial use by well more than the 2/3 vote needed for a bylaw change. Since then, town meeting has also overwhelmingly supported 2 extensions of this moratorium. So through these votes, the members of town meeting have essentially said that yes, zoning and land use regulations need to be studied and updated to protect neighborhoods and residential properties. By approving this moratorium, residents have essentially asked or instructed the planning board in its role of reviewing and updating the zoning bylaw to study the concern about land use in town. I want to be clear that the work the planning board has undertaken for the past few years and continues to do with this latest proposal is in response to residents' concerns and not at the direction of any other board or department in town. We work to support the residents and property owners in town, and the 3 affirmative votes on the moratorium have made the residents' concerns clear. Note that the planning board is also charged in the bylaw to study the needs of town and to propose improvements to town meeting. So while the moratorium spoke of residents' concerns, the planning board could also bring proposals on their own outside of something like the moratorium. Over the past 3 town meetings, zoning bylaw changes have been proposed and approved, which have helped to better organize the bylaw and provide additional guidelines and regulations for property uses in Essex. In May 2023, the bylaw was reorganized with no changes to the substance or intent of the bylaw. Last November 2023 at town meeting, the main change was to formalize the general use district, which currently includes about 98% of the land in Essex, and where all uses are still permitted, including residential, business, and industrial. At this time, the only residential districts are tiny ones out at Canoma Point, and you can see those 2 small districts in the upper right-hand corner of the map. The downtown district, established in May of 2021, created an area along the causeway where multi-use buildings are permitted, which are not allowed outside of that area. The downtown district is in the center of town here in the red crosshatch district around the causeway. In addition, at that meeting, site plan review requirements were updated to require a butter notification and a public hearing when property changes use. At the last town meeting in May, the main changes adopted included several new special permit categories, as well as expanded guidelines and standards for special permits to help both applicants and the planning board. The next logical step in working towards providing better protection for residents in neighborhoods is to propose residential districts. Residential districts are typical in every neighboring community. In fact, Essex is the only municipality in the eastern half of Massachusetts without residential districts throughout town. To start this process, the Planning Board has reviewed surveys from 2 projects where the Metropolitan Area Planning Council assisted us, as well as earlier surveys by other committees in town. There is a consensus around the assets of the river and the marsh in our scenic areas and small town rural feel. This helped inform the selection of where rural residential districts are located. We also took a look at what neighboring communities do, since examples of other solutions are always instructive. We found that all our neighbors have relatively small commercial and industrial districts compared to the area of land that is set aside for strictly residential use. And even with our proposal for districts shown on the map here, we still allow much more area for businesses than our neighbors do. Our next step was to overlay the types of property uses that the assessors use to categorize properties in town, including several types of residential use, quite a few different categories of commercial or business and industrial uses, along with open spaces categorized as forest, agricultural, or recreation. Other categories in the map that we used as a reference include municipal uses, developable land, and undevelopable land. Understanding the established use patterns in town told us where businesses tend to grow and which areas are more residential in nature, again, helping to inform where districts would be appropriate. The board also considered the areas of town that are on the sewer system and are therefore more suitable for future development. And although current sewer flow is limited, this may not always be the case in the future. The planning board also prepared another survey asking residents about types of businesses that they would or would not welcome in their neighborhood. Without getting too deep into the results, which are available on the planning board webpage along with all of this information, we found that residents in or near downtown area are more amenable to certain small-scale types of businesses than are residents in the more outlying areas of town. This helped steer us towards creating 2 types of districts, which you can see from the map are the village residential districts, which are the pale purple grayish shade around downtown, and the rural residential districts, which are the green areas more towards the outskirts of town. It's important to also consider that the areas that are not highlighted on the map as either of the new proposed districts, so either the gray or the green on the map, and these are the areas that will remain in the general use district, which are white on the map. The continued role of the general use district is important since all uses, residential, business, and industrial, can still develop by right in these areas. And since areas of town are still open for all these uses, we are not faced with needing to create actual commercial or industrial districts. The areas in the general use remain as they are today with all uses as options, but they also include residential uses. So trying to draw actual boundaries for commercial and industrial districts is complicated and would include residences, which could be problematic. Simply because Essex is pretty much built out, and we're coming kind of late to the effort of residential districts. So the village districts are closer to the center of town and are on either end of the downtown district and out along western and eastern avenues, which is also the main sort of area that's served by the sewer system. Then the more rural areas towards the outskirts of town are included in the rural residential district. While the rural residential district will not permit new business uses outside of B&Bs, the village district will allow new uses that qualify as village businesses. The new definition for village business is included in the end of the article, and that's the handout that you have. There's 22 pages, I think. Will allow, the definition for village business is included at the end of the article as an addition to section 6-4, which is use regulations. This section describes the characteristics and features of a neighborhood scale business that would fit into a residential area with minimal disruption. The criteria that will be used to evaluate a proposal's suitability for siting in a residential neighborhood will include concerns like adequate off-street parking, limited increases in traffic, and other safety and infrastructure concerns like emergency access, access to necessary utilities, including sewer, hours of operation, size and scale of buildings, and other site features, including signage and displays, and effects on the surrounding area, including light, noise, odors, and other interferences that could extend beyond property lines. Municipal uses are also defined at the end of that article, since these are included in the tables of uses that are in the article for each district. The most important part of the proposed bylaw section for each district is the allowable use table. These are on pages 2 and 3 for the village district, and on pages 11 and 12 for the rural district, and I'll walk through those briefly in a moment. Another point to clarify is how the property uses are permitted in Essex, and this has typically been through the building permit process, including site plan review by the planning board when warranted. Some uses require special permit, which includes public hearing and abutter notification. If a use or buildings are approved, the planning board writes a decision, which the applicant then records with their property deed with the registry. It's a more rigorous process with opportunities for the planning board to impose limitations and also the ability to reject an application if it doesn't meet established criteria. What's important to point out with the new districts that are being proposed is that the only changes that are made, the only differences that are made right now between property, general use district and either the village or the rural residential district are in the use tables. We haven't changed anything about the dimensional standards for any of the districts, so whatever is applicable now would be applicable in the new districts. And in addition to things like parking and accessory structures, all that is still the same as required in the general use district. It's just the use tables that show up on page 2 and 3. So if you look at that under, on page 2, under commercial, you'll see that business in the village district, which is first, has an N, so that business is not permitted. However, immediately under that is village business, which is what's provided in the new definition. And the use type, an existing business use is permitted to continue or change as a village business, and that's governed by site plan review. An existing residential use can change to a business use through the special permit process. So this still allows areas where businesses could develop, but it's controlled through the site plan review process so that the planning board, through that process, can work with the community to ensure that the proposed business fits the residential scale of the neighborhood. And the way a village business is defined at the end of this article, it's left to interpretation a bit, because throughout the village residential districts, there are small back roads, and then there are also larger roads like Western, Eastern, and Martin Street. And the scale of something that would be appropriate on, say, Route 22 is different than the scale of something that would be appropriate on Story Street. So that's what the definition of village business is trying to hone in on. So other than that, the uses that are permitted for both the rural and the village residential districts, with the rural table on 11 and 12, is virtually the same, except that in the rural residential district, village business is not permitted as a new use either. Bed and breakfast is the only business use that's listed as a special permit. The other thing that's important to note, that if and when zoning changes like this are voted on and made, all existing uses right now that are in effect legally are vested in perpetuity, such that an existing business, if it falls within either the village or the residential district, has the right to remain as that type of business in perpetuity. It becomes a non-conforming use, and we've added criteria regarding non-conforming use to each of the districts that talks about the process for changing. So at page 7 in the village district, and on page 16 for the rural district talks about nonconforming uses, and properties with nonconforming uses may be considered for a change of use to another nonconforming use through the special permit process, which will allow the change of use only if the proposed use is not more detrimental to the neighborhood. And then uses, properties B is properties with nonconforming uses may expand or alter the structures and other physical features of the property that support this through the special permit process, which is standard for how nonconforming uses and structures are treated in general. I think that's pretty much the overview. I'm gonna turn it over to the planning board members. If they have comments or questions on anything, we'll do those first, and then we'll switch to audience members, members of the public attending. We'll do questions first, and then we'll do comment. Planning board members, questions, comments? No, we've lived this for a long time already and talked about it forever. Okay, so members of the public, if you have questions at this time, please come to the microphone and give your name and address, and we'll do our best to address your questions. And then when questions are completed, we'll take public comment. Public comment can be made for the record. We're not going to debate or discuss anything other than answering questions to the extent that we can. Is this questions, or are you?
This is a question.
Okay, sure, yep.
So,
I just want to make sure
I would-
everyone's questions are done first before we go to comment.
Okay, it's a question on the map. Is that allowed at this point?
Yep, yeah. Yep.
Okay. So, I was on the board last
So,
year.
name and address, please,
Oh,
for the record.
Judd Lane, 21 Lanes Road. I was on the board last year, and I think the goal was to carve out residential areas that were mostly residential. And what I see is everything is now rural residential, which is restricted to business. And I fall in that area, which is kind of a big problem. The other thing I see with this map is that all the white, which is the general use district, is mostly wetlands and protected by green belt or whatever. My lot, which is white, is general use, but it's 80% protected by a conservation restriction. So I can't do anything with it. So it's kind of disingenuous to say that that's a general use district when it's protected by a conservation restriction. So I feel like we went from 90% you can do whatever you want and start a business on your property to 90% it's all locked down, there is no business. And so I have a real problem with that, and I know a lot of other people do have a problem with that. I've lived here my whole life, and my grandfather bought the property in 1943. Was a farm, 83 acres, and the farm didn't really work out, so we had to change the barn to an antique store, and luckily back then, we could do that. It was something that we could change the use to an antique store. Now it's actually Museo Designs, which I rented out as a retail store. But we wouldn't have been able to survive, we would have had to sell our land if we couldn't have adapted the property to pay the taxes. So I just feel like it's way off base to lock the whole town down. And Essex was built on small businesses. If you look around, Ernie's, Erba, Essex Shellfish, Cape Ann Sup, that's a new one that just popped up, and they have a beautiful business. They grew up, the couple is friends with my son, and they grew up together on the Essex River, went surfing, and they started a business. And they have their parents living in an apartment right next to them. That's the perfect Essex situation, the Essex dream. So I just feel like this is way over the top, and I couldn't support this. I really think it's a slight on the business community and the way Essex was brought up, and the way we've survived for many years. So that's basically it.
Okay. Any other questions, or are we moving to comments now, I guess?
I got a couple questions. I got a couple of questions. Skip Crocker, Samuel Crocker, Crocker's Boatyard, 160 and 164 John Wise Ave. I live on Southern Ave. Question, looking at the map, there's a number of properties in the general district that are all commercial businesses. Why were some businesses such as mine on John Wise Ave not hand-picked out to remain commercial? I know I'm right at the top there, John Wise Ave before Choate Street. I know it's a small lot, but you kind of hand-picked like Duncan's property, Hardy's property, Palazzolo property, Wise Marine property, Glass Dimensions property. There's like a little group down there on Western. I don't understand why some existing businesses were put into different districts and other businesses were chosen to remain general district.
The properties left in general district were.
General use.
General use district were typically ones that appeared to have property that was still available and were.
Palazzolos and Wise Marine are too small. I mean, they're competitors too. They're too small footprints. And, you know, my competitors get left in general use. I get put into rural residential. I don't understand the thinking behind it. I think it's unfair, for one, but this is question time, so I'm not going to comment.
Right.
Secondly, now my property is rural residential. It's a commercial use. I understand it's grandfathered in. Now, let's say 20 years from now, my kids want to sell the property to another business. Does it have to stay a boatyard, marine-related use, or is it business to business? I know we've crossed this bridge before when I was on the board, and it was, you know, as long as it remained a business use, it didn't matter what the business was.
As long as it's a comparable business use, I think.
It has to be a similar business use. It can't be just any, you know, somebody wants to go in there and start a carpentry shop, which we clearly don't do.
Well, that would probably qualify as a comparable business because you're classified as
Trying to determine how
industrial.
much effect this has on my value of my property.
Right, but to change to something like retail would be different than. But there's also, what we've added in the language is that non-conforming to non-conforming, so properties with non-conforming uses may be considered for a change to a use of another non-conforming use through the special permit process. So even though your use is non-conforming, if you wanted to make it a retail place, it would also be non-conforming. That could be done through the special permit process, is what the language here says.
And so now my property is rural residential, and I want to put an addition on my building. Are there more hoops I have to jump through now to get that building permit?
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Peter Fippen, 2 John Wise Ave. Did you guys take a look at where this type of zoning was done in other communities to see what the impact was on property values, whether they went up or down depending on what district they were in?
Every other town's had residential zoning districts since the 1970s, so we've.
Well, there's some out west or wherever, you know, Western Mass, that have done this recently.
Yeah, there are 4 others that don't have residential districts in Western Mass, and I don't know that they would be comparable to.
Yeah, so there's nothing
Northeast
that's been done recently that you could compare or find out what's happened. Did you talk to real estate brokers or anybody like that to see what their thoughts were on that?
No, we haven't. We have talked to residents, and we know, I've heard from residents that they know of neighbors who have been next to businesses and had to take less than what realtors had estimated their property values to be. So it seems that having business uses in a residential, or business or industrial uses in what's largely a residential neighborhood has an immediate effect on the abutters of
Okay,
decreased value.
all right, thanks.
Hi, Lisa. Anthony Shimataro. I've got small wholesale. Anthony Shimataro, 57 Western Ave. I have a small wholesale lobster operation right alongside the Eagles Nest Playground. I'm sure you're probably familiar with it. Anyway, I didn't bring my good glasses, so I can't really read it too good. I'm wondering, am I in the residential zone? I'm right alongside the school.
Yes, you are. You're in the Village Residential District.
So I wanted to ask the same question that that gentleman just asked before. If the time comes and I have a chance to sell my property, the whole thing, would there be an issue with me?
You would probably, I can't really see your business from the street, but it's set way back, and your type of business would qualify as a village business, which is a right in the village residential district. The village businesses have a right there, so you could sell it as a business. It's not just that it's vested, but it's actually, it's a right in the village, because the village residential district has been developed to include residential scale businesses.
So mine is residential and business.
Yeah, I can't make a decision on something here, but I'm just offering that you have a building next door to your house where you run your business, and it is set back from the street, so it has a village feel to it. It's not disruptive to the neighborhood. But I'm trying to answer the question and provide context around it. I can't provide any kind of a decision or definitive ruling or whatever you'd want to call it on your particular property. This isn't the forum for that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Karen Moulton. I'm from 132 John Wise Ave. And my question is, I think the same as what Skip was saying, is how was it decided of what was getting picked out of the residential and not? Because I myself am put in the residential, my competitor is not. And to not go too much into my personal story, back on April 5th, I wrote a really lovely letter to Bill Sanborn telling him that I could only afford to move here if it could be a business. And I got the permit, and I went through this whole process, and you guys came out to our property, and you did everything, and I spent thousands and thousands of dollars, and now it seems like you're changing it, and I truly did all of the research, and everything was above board, and I got the permit for mixed use, and I got all of that, and now it looks like you're specifically saying I have to go back to residential, and I don't think that is the intention of what this town and everything is for. On top of John Wise Ave is a state highway, so I don't know if there's anything residential about that road. It is so non-residential that the school bus can't stop there. My kids couldn't get on the bus there. I can't get my mail there without the police stopping, telling me that I can't park my car there. Like, there's a lot of reasons why that John Wise is not residential, on top of all the other businesses. So I guess I'm asking specifically why certain businesses were picked out and others weren't, whether it was because they were businesses, but I have the permit saying that I am a business as well. So I'm just looking for specific how it was picked and chose, so I can understand that it's not a personal thing.
It's not a personal thing. We were looking for properties that appeared to have developable land that would make sense to leave them in general use to develop them. If a business is captured like yours in a rural residential district, all the rights that you have now are vested, and you have those in perpetuity.
Right, but you're giving limitations on them. They're not exactly what you're saying.
For an addition, correct. if you're changing the scale of it.
But my
Yes,
competitor that's less than a mile down the road on the same state highway, and we bought him the same year, we're the same size, he does not have to do something that I do.
We were looking for areas of land that were contiguous and developable. So this was not a personal looking at things. We were looking for areas that would hold potential for businesses to grow larger or new businesses. So those were why those were left in the general use district.
So I guess I'm still confused on John Wise Ave, why there's a huge, large white spot and then green. Like, why was 4 more properties not added to that white spot? Or where is it just those properties picked? Out of the middle of a residential, it's in the middle, it's not touching the town, it's not touching the Ipswich line, it's just kind of in the middle, and I'm just curious.
This was an evolutionary process, and we looked at it and we developed it. So we were trying to preserve areas. Instead of painting everything green, we were trying to preserve some areas, understanding that there may be a need for business growth in the future if the causeway becomes unusable. So it was looking at land use and areas that were available. So that's all I have to offer. I don't know what, we weren't looking at specific businesses, we were looking at areas of land. I don't know. We did not keep a list of each property and a decision based on, it was more of a broad brush look at the town to try and preserve both the rural residential feel of the outskirts of town was one of the goals of the process.
So, okay. So I guess, what would it take to have, in a selfish way, have it adjusted that John Wise is continuous general use white and not all green?
What do you mean, what would it take?
To have this map adjusted?
This is written in the warrant, and it has to come to town meeting like this because it's been published. We don't have the opportunity right now to make any changes to the map.
Okay, thank you.
Can I respond to that a little
Sure.
bit? At town meeting, you do have the, sorry. At town meeting, you do have the ability to stand up and debate the map. It's not as if you don't have that ability.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It just is disconcerting and. Yeah, it's just disconcerting, but we're not that common yet.
Any other comments or questions from the public?
Yeah, just on my comment on the value of my property, it's not necessarily in selling the property.
Skip, I'm sorry, can you come to the mic?
Sorry.
It's okay, I can't hear you.
My concern with the value of my property being diminished potentially is not for value of selling it, is when I go to apply for loans, the property's appraised. It's been appraised twice in the last 5 years at a certain number. My loans are based on those numbers, and if it gets appraised again and I don't meet those numbers, because now I'm rural residential, it's a big impact to my business. And down the street, Palazzo Brothers competitor, Wise Marina competitor, it's general use, Essex Marina competitor, general use. You know, you're kind of unleveling the playing field.
I second that.
I mean, my bank's all over me. I'm trying to expand my marina in Manchester, and my loans are based on my properties being worth a certain X amount. So that's my concern. I'm not leaving Essex. I have no intention to leave Essex. I'm vested in the town, so it just feels like there's an unfair playing field being set by this map. And I get it, it's gotta go to town meeting, and I get it, I'm late to the party, and I should have been paying attention, but other things take precedence too, so That's my concern.
Appreciate your comments. Any other comments? Questions? All right, I will take a motion to close the public hearing.